Hello everyone, I'll be your host MX2, and in this video we'll be talking about the release log for Boxcutter 719_3. The goal of this update was primarily to fix Ngon, primarily the points edition, and get it up to a state where it could be used in long takes without issues. Believe me, if you're using any version of Boxcutter prior to 719.3 like 719.2 or 1, there was definitely some launch issues that was happening with dots possibly being inaccurate or disappearing, and just a plethora of things that have made us have to go back and reevaluate the system. So I'm proud of the progress that's been made with it and the improvements that's been had with it to get it up to this point. So instead of talking about individual features and improvements that have came with Ngon dots, I figured it would be a lot easier to just do a simple demonstration of going to Box City utilizing his latest update. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. So to commemorate Ngon in 719.3, let's just have a little fun going to Box City. So looking at it from front view, I'm just going to take this cube, SZ, scale it down. I already have my hotkeys displaying, so there's no need for me to narrate them. So I'm just going to tab into edit mode, and let's control click mark in order to just round out one corner. And I'm going to press Alt X, press X to reset the mirror. We'll hold Shift, and then we won't hold Shift when we click the Y, so that way we can mirror on X into Y and close it. Q sharpen, and I'm just going to unmark this corner so that way it's just nice and smooth on this transition. And looking at it from side view, let's go ahead and just jump over to Ngon. And the thing about Ngon is I've gotten pretty well acquainted with drawing it the way that I want. So if I were to go into pause mode, you know, normally I don't even have to move points that often, but it is nice that points are now much more stable than they were on the launch version. So we'll just press spacebar to complete the operation. Since this is its own piece, we'll press Q and just lower the bevel just slightly, you know, not all the way in, but just enough to give it a bit of a differential just so we have something to work with here. And from here, let's continue. I was thinking for a moment exactly what steps I want to do. I always like to change up everything I do between these demos. So let's shift click Smart Apply. To get a clone of a Smart Apply, we'll select these and set and begin solidifying. So really the specific maneuvers aren't that important, but I did want to just kind of do a long take with Boxcutter to demonstrate the stability that's been brought about as a result of the most recent updates. With 3.0, I know it's a little bit more hazy, you know, we'll have to see how things play out with it, but it is something that we are well aware of. So let's press Alt V and then E in order to change the visualization, because without any visualization as far as cavities, it's just naked in the 3D view. And we'll just perform a separation here, press B, bevel it in, give it one segment, D, jump over to Ngon, and I hope everyone's enjoying having the new helper as default as of these latest updates of Boxcutter. There hasn't been a lot of kickback on that or comments, so I'm assuming that that went well for everyone. However, there is always the toggle to change that back, where you can just click on the sprocket and under input you can just turn off D-key helper, and then you have the classic Boxcutter pie. But for me, I'm helper all the way, especially because this thing just has everything in it. I can just quickly jump over to box, I can jump to wedge, I can enable bevel. And bevel is one of those things you hardly see me talking about with Ngon, but it is quite good as well. So we have bevel as our start state, we have Ngon as our shape, and so this means that whenever I begin drawing my shape, it's going to automatically be beveled, which looks weird. I actually drive the guys crazy all the time talking about how there's a true form of Ngon that I feel could be accomplished that looks good whenever there's overlap happening. And while this shape came out looking kind of strange, that's because of the amount of bevel we have. We could press B and just begin bringing that in, bring it all the way in order to transition to something rounder, which will probably serve us better for this. So let's look at this bottom area. I wasn't entirely sure if I was accurate with this whenever I was pulling it, but it looks like it's actually doing all right. So having these points as an edit mode is pretty nice. You know, the next thing is being able to bevel individual points. You know, just a pretty long list of things that we want to do with points, ranging from being able to delete them and being able to recall previous Ngon shapes and also edit them. But you know how it goes with us. There's always a kind of default task tree we go through as far as making all these systems play together. So, you know, even the most uneventful updates are good because, you know, they introduce more stability. But rest assured that anytime we're not working on something flashy, we're definitely working on our fundamentals and getting everything to try to be as stable and as fast as ever, because Blender is always changing. You know, you never know exactly what's going to be awaiting you in the next version of Blender, and 3.0 is definitely given us a few surprises, especially with Everscroll kind of crashing on right click, which is rather egregious at this moment, but you know, we'll move past it. You know, bugs exist to be crushed. So with this shape, we're just gonna jump back to Ngon, but I don't want bevel as my default state. And here we are with bevel as our default state, which is fine, but we want to get that turned off. Let's try it again. And I don't know, maybe that was a hallucination where it didn't happen. And I'm trying to remind myself to go into Ngon edit mode in order to demonstrate the points more, but I just don't make that many mistakes. I mean, maybe a few, but whenever it comes to needing to modify my points, it's just so rare. I'm actually more excited about the, let's extrude this, WW. We'll hold control to get a perfect wedge. Yeah, I'm more excited about the idea of points coming to box because, you know, being able to draw a box and then tab it and modify it is definitely going to be one of those game changers. You know, box is my baby. It's such a cheap and inexpensive shape compared to circle. However, you know, Ngon is one of those things that, you know, we were kind of rushed into in the 2.8 era. You know, at first we were dealing with just box and circle, but, you know, we had a lot of comments that were like, man, I can't wait for Ngon. We really need Ngon. So, you know, with Ngon being rushed in, we never really got a chance to give it the love and attention that it required. And I would say now we're finally getting to that point. I'm going to need to recall this shape. Let's try it again, select the right shape. Difference, and we're good to go. All right, just didn't want that nasty Z fighting happening. And, you know, we're just getting in here, just having a little fun with Boxcutter. Going to Box City, which Box City is a kind of tool test of sorts. It's not supposed to be like your portfolio unless you're cutting the hell out of some boxes, but you know, it's good to get in and have some fun with something that's actually not difficult, you know, in terms of 3D. We're going to shift the shape to live, so I can press Alt W and switch over to Hops tool. And I'm just going to shift click diamond so we can place a diamond inside of this bull shape. And let's just lift this up, bring this up as well. And I'm going to select this shape, select any other shape, and with both of them under modifier, I'm going to first shift click X and then just not shift click in order to mirror modifier it on the Y as well. So this is what our shape is looking like so far. You know, nothing really special, just basic, but we're just getting in here, just having some fun playing with Ngon. Of course, I'm going to bring up a plane, solidify it, use it to cut a difference in, which we can jump back over to Boxcutter and just use box in order to cut a wedge, maybe a couple of wedges just to get this thing looking good. You know, I like to always trim things with wedges just to indicate where you could insert a screwdriver to basically detach things from each other, but wedge is just such a good follow-up for adding some nice shading differential between surfaces. Anyways, I also realized that there are some other things I want. Alright, so continuing on, let's take a look at this area. I'm going to enable grid, and of course grid is going to perform admirably whenever it comes to Ngon as well. You know, all these things are just built to work together without any sort of disconnection. You know, I always refer to Boxcutter as a crystal dragon because, you know, when it's put together, it's just this dragon spitting fire, but when it's felling, it fells all together and nothing works at all. So it's a dragon made of crystal, very fine, but very dangerous. But that's just me. You know what, we're gonna just move these points on the other side of the mirror point so we don't have that weirdness. Maybe press X to get our slice and then we'll keep it. And from here, let's just shift click smart apply, grab these faces, I to inset. You know, if we go too far, I'll have to use a little mesh machine to clean up, but just a little less and we'll be able to make it today. Select both of these, Q and difference, and we see that, you know, for some reason it didn't work. So let's get in and take a look at our mesh. Wish there was some way we could see, you know, if points are overlapping or doubled, but there just isn't. Let's try it again. There we go. And we could also, you know, perform a shift and turn this into a slash, except that time it didn't let me. So instead of asking questions, we are just going to jump over to Hops tool and also shift click diamond in order to bring in diamond. Actually, let's delete it. One I do want to also talk about is Honeycomb. Honeycomb plays by some different rules where basically you have to actually deal with it by a corner because it actually goes out on the X and Y. I mean, eventually we may revisit the system using geometry nodes or something, but it's just something to be aware of. So we're just going to go to array and just begin scrolling through it. Of course, we can also use our tally to jump between which array we want to adjust. So I'm just going to array number 4. And that one was a mistake. Let's try that again. You know, it's also easier to just drag the dots under Hops tool. Control Shift dragging these dots in order to adjust it instead of just fighting through for the right array. Keep in mind that, you know, these things that are inserted via Hops tool are made up of a series of modifiers, but just like that, we've went in and just created a quick little platform. Of course, I can now select everything. If I control click blank material, everything now has just a random blank material. Let's give these the exact same material, so I'll just give those a material without control clicking. And from here, let's just change materials as we see fit until we get something looking, actually, if I can undo without crashing. Thank you, Blender. I could use Everscroll to recall the right cutter, or since I'm in Hops tool, just hold control and also just recall the right cutter. You know, crazy enough is if you're in Everscroll, or if you're in Everscroll recalling booleans, you could also hold control and you get access to your Hops tool dot. So much work has gone into making our systems kind of play with each other and be familiar that if it makes sense, it's probably on the list. So now from here, we can begin just transitioning everything to be a bevel. Bevel will just make everything look better. Give it a little more definition. Have our model, you know, look back at us with conviction once you slap a bevel on it, except you give it a bevel too big without some sort of guidance edges being resolved. In fact, I'm actually more curious as to what is causing that. So let's talk about what it would take to make this actually work out for us. And that would be, you know, first let's Alt V, look at the wireframe, just to see what we're dealing with here. We don't actually require the bevel, we can just apply that. However, we probably don't require a bevel, we can just delete that. And because it's still a cube, that means that first we have to place an edge on the middle to satiate that, because we have a clipping mirror happening. But other than that, we can place a few guidance edges, which now kind of has the geometry running a little bit more clean. Of course, we have to give our first edge to satiate that. I mean, I'm sure there's a way around it. Probably just turning off the mirror for a moment. But now, once we go in and we adjust our bevel, we're able to get a larger amount, just resulting in a nicer result. So, you know, you don't always have to let your bevel be limited by your artistic decisions, but, you know, do be prepared to go in and make adjustments, just because, you know, blender be blender. So I'm going to turn off grid, leaving me with dots, and from here we are just going to bring in one more box wedge. And for bevel, we're just going to alt scroll. Actually, let's add a new bevel on top of that. I'm actually modifying the previous bevel, which is silly. The previous bevel is actually for this corner. So if we go to bevel and we were to control scroll to jump to the next bevel, here we are adjusting this corner again, and then we control scroll to jump back to the bevel that we're actually caring about today. And let's press Alt V, turn off our wireframe, and this is now our result. So I'm going to just save this as a cue box. You know, this is basically what cue boxes are to me. They're just little quick tool tests of me just getting in and getting warmed up. We could also press Alt VV to change our viewport to something that's a little more flattering. You know, I'm just pressing S to scroll through these, press V to turn it off so I see just a mesh. You know, some of these remind me of some kind of marmoset experiences back in the day, like that one. You know, we might go with that one as our look dev. We could also press Alt V and, you know, go to blank light and, you know, find a blank light configuration for what we're going for, which my goal was just to make a platform and to place a cube on top of it, maybe apply the location so that way whenever we scale, we're scaling from the center of the cube or the bottom base. You know, we'll give it a blank material as well. Maybe just the right blank material though. Something like that. And just like that, we've made a quick platform, just getting in, playing with a little bit of Ngon and a little bit of HardOps, just in a quick example. You know, an additional thing we could also do is, with this piece selected, I'm going to just shift click Smart Apply, which will give me a duplicate. A duplicate is one of my favorite ways to just get a derived mesh. So with this edge ring, I'm actually pointing at the monitor like a crazy person, but we're just going to bring this up, GG, slide this back, GG, press S, scale it in just a little bit so that way we have something to work with. You know, we'll scale it back so it's actually connecting with this area. And with these points, we could just press Control Shift B. And from here, let's now control click Smart Apply, which will convert it to a curve. So, you know, the difference between converting it through Smart Apply and using 2Curve is just whenever you use the version that's in Smart Apply, it actually replaces the mesh completely with the curve versus the other one, which will leave you with your original mesh. So sometimes that is really the matter of which one do I use between the other. And so after mirroring it over to the other side, we now have like a protective barrier to ensure that, you know, no one gets hurt. However, we may also need like a turnbuckle as well, just in case a wrestling event is happening here. So Shift D, Control A, Visual Geometry to Mesh, and I'm just going to grab these two loops. And keep in mind, I'm doing this to a duplicate. The other one is still a curve, and we'll Control I and delete everything else. QOT, spacebar, convex hull, and we're done. Of course, we do want to grab the area that we derived it from and just get rid of it. It'd be cool if we could QOT from a curve, but I'm pretty sure if I asked that decision, someone would pull their hair out. So I'll spare you guys, unless you're watching, you know, in which case you've walked up to the task. So let's just shift click to add an auto smooth. I'm just looking at this and thinking about what order of operations do I want to do. Of course, I want to clean the mesh first, but we see that it's just going to be weird that way. So let's see if we can clean this up a little bit, because in the original version I just didn't care, but in this one I should pretend to care. That way people don't think there's something wrong with me. So let's alt click, grab this, V. We can select this whole other side, or we should. Let's just mirror it to the bottom. And that didn't do what I expected it to. Alright, so here's the skinny. I actually only need from here to here, Control I. You know, sometimes convex be making me have to rebuild some meshes after the fact. You know, no beef, just chilling. But you better watch yourself. And that's actually all the way across. When I'm dealing with it in local mode, without being able to see a dang thing, it's hard to tell. Well, since we have it at this point, we'll just Alt S and push it out instead of using a displace modifier. And then we'll just add a bevel, and then add a bevel. So we have something like that. Not so hard. I don't know why I was struggling with it. But just like that, we have now just, you know, modeled this little area and blocked it in. Of course, we can draw one more box for a Ngon opportunity. So SZ, ignoring that shadow in the back that's haunting me. It's like a haunted Eevee shadow. You know, we won't talk about that. Happy Halloween. Alt W, and we're now accessing Ngon line. So Ngon line, you know, if you're familiar with me, you know how I like to use it, just like that. And in edit mode, we also see that we still have dots to be able to transform this and make adjustments just in case you need to, in which case I'm going to do so right now. Maybe press T to adjust the thickness, and then press spacebar in order to complete that operation. For the mesh itself, we do want to mirror it across itself, turning it into one of these sort of rails, and then we can just get in here and start going to town on it. But look how my alignment is. Because we Alt S pushed it, the normals are slightly off, which is just making it weird. So let's SZ 0 just to flatten it out, and that almost has it back normal. But of course, you always have the option to deal with nearest edge. And nearest edge is going to use nearest edge, and you know, that's all she wrote whenever it comes to unwieldy edges and orientation inside of Boxcutter. Sometimes your nearby geometry can be your guiding key. So let's just press spacebar. And looking at the time, I see this video is getting a little long. I probably should wrap it up. But you know, we're just having such fun here. You know, another thing that I did originally in my test demo was play with dots and just admire how, you know, control double click just still works. You know, sometimes if we don't talk about something, it just falls apart, but being able to just repeat, just one of those things that I just love, even though I would love to also be able to make the grid just a little bit smaller from this, but we'll just scale the shape, move it around a little bit, and with that, I can at least wrap up this demo, just showcasing the stabilities that's been brought with Ngon and talking a little bit about, you know, future plans with it. But, you know, whenever it comes to adding a new feature, the first thing is always, as always, is getting it stable and getting it predictable, and then making it, you know, reliable enough to be a mainstay, because we definitely can't add something and then expand upon it without it being stable enough for it to support all the underlying systems that's been built around it. But, you know, that's not even for me to discuss, because that's beyond my level of intelligence. But with that, I will wrap up this video, and I'll see you guys next time. You know, it'd be cool is if we put a bunch of camera cuts on this, so that way we had something to cycle through at the beginning of the video, which will also subsequently make us have to do more cuts to make it cool. So I'm just going to look at it from here, press Alt V, and I'll get out Simplify so I can at least see a 3D cursor. And, you know, looking at it from here, I can just press Q, add camera, and I'm going to be looking at the 3D cursor. My track 2 constraint is going to be pointed there whenever it comes to the camera, and I can press GZZ in order to move it. And so this is what we're looking at so far. We'll give ourselves about 2000 frames, so that way it plays nice and slow. So this is our first cut, and I like to change it about every 150 frames. So next we'll come down and just look at one of our platforms. So we'll place our 3D cursor probably here. So we can press Q with nothing selected and just add another camera. And so now we have a camera that's actually moving around this as well. And then usually once it becomes a little extra, that's when I move on to the next one. Yeah, I usually have it do camera cuts before it does any clipping. So with nothing selected, we'll press Q, add another camera again. We have this cut happening. And 600 on the dot. We'll just look at it from the top, maybe Shift C, place our cursor precisely on the top. And with nothing selected, we can just add another camera. And let's look at it from the front. And I'm going to just give it a really linear camera, like so. Except I do want to select that latest empty, just bring it up a little bit, and then also bring my camera down, so that way we have something like that happening. And from here, let's actually look at our timeline as a whole, because I'm pretty sure I can just Shift D, duplicate all of my markers, placing it back at my first marker. And then we just want to make sure it ends with that first marker too, so that way the beginning and the end are almost exactly the same whenever it comes to markers. But now we have all these cool camera cuts happening, and I know I set it up a little fast because it's a video and I always care about time, but let's just see what we have here. So first, let's deal with our environment, and we can just randomly scroll through some blank lights until we get one that we like. And let's look at our render. Our render is going to be darker because we didn't make our look dev go to the render. But cool thing is that, you know, you can now actually just shift click look dev and it will actually make it go over to your render settings as well. So here we just have all of our camera cuts happening. We're looking at it in render view, and it's just going through all of the motions. In fact, because of where we're looking, you know, we could do some cuts just for the purposes of this particular video. In fact, let's use Ngon. You know, Ngon is what we're talking about today. I don't even know if this is the right side of things, but we're just gonna have to believe in our propensities of workspace, which for me, I feel that I'm always even placing my cameras starting from the left side of the screen. However, it appears that I was correct in that. So let's select this, bring our rail down just a little bit to penetrate. And let's also recall this cutter and take a look at it in front view. And we're working in render mode at this point. Crazy stuff, but we're just going to get in, draw our Ngon line, press T to make adjustments, press Tab to pause. We have all of our dots, which was a bug in a previous version of Ngon, but has now been resolved, hopefully. And just like that, we now have this shot looking a little bit more interesting. So let's jump to this shot. And, you know, me and what I call interesting may differ from what you call interesting. But for me, we're just going to put a few little box cuts here, just have a little fun. Let the camera rotate. This one's looking good. You know, we could also be playing with each shot, adding some depth of field to really set this thing off. And instead of just allowing the camera to randomly let me possibly cut on the wrong side, I'm just going to jump to front view and perform a cut from the right side. And of course, jump over to Ngon, alt scroll up to Ngon line, and we just do our thing. And that is our thing. And we see that that thing was not kind to us this day. So maybe a little movement will give us some versatility. But really, I'm thinking that we need to first apply the bevel, and then we need to just give it a loop cut, possibly. But we also need to recall the shape that's on the other side, this shape, which is a solidified shape, so I can't add a loop cut to it. But once we give it a loop on the inside, we see that it's a little bit more cooperative. However, this shape also isn't cooperating, so look at our video getting extended by randomness. But thanks to the power of Ngon, we'll press C to get out of cyclic. We'll just cut out some sections that are not working and see if we can make it a little bit more reasonable. And I think really it comes down to us having this just way too low in this when we actually have other cuts happening on the inside. So one cut and we are now back in business. So my apologies for that moment. But now let us go through and look at our sequence, which is now looking a little bit more interesting because we added a few cuts. So with that, I now have the intro for beginning this video and talking about the log, coming back to the past, coming back to the future, or coming back to the past to talk about the future where I'll be talking about the past. Never mind, I'm going to wrap this up.